answer the first question about smart contracts, one of the greatest lies ever told is that Ethereum is a world computer. This was something Stephen Tuwal came up with after I left Ethereum, and I thought it was not only dishonest, but it wasn't just rational from a computer science viewpoint. Ethereum is not a world computer. You can't go and take Ethereum and run what you run on Amazon or Rackspace or a Microsoft server on Ethereum. It is a replicated computation space. It's a super scarce resource, and it is not built in any way that can scale to the needs of even a moderately successful application. For example, CryptoKitties killed the entire network. One viral app that wasn't even that viral. So if you can't say that this system is somehow super successful and it's been globally adopted and it is the standard, this was a lie that Consensus told for pumping the price of Ethereum. They said, we are the standard. Now, first I ask is, let's look at developers. How many people are actually writing Solidity code compared to people writing .NET code, Java code, Swift code, Objective-C code? If you write a pie chart, you wouldn't even see the slice that's actually writing dApps. Second, the 95% of the meat and potatoes of a dApp doesn't live on a blockchain once it's actually done right. It actually lives on an off-chain. It's written in JavaScript, and they use Web3. So it's like these guys, I remember in 2015 and 16 and 17, it was so annoying. They said, we're going to do decentralized Uber. Okay, great. So they start writing some Solidity code. They say, shit, it can't run on Ethereum. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a lot of the logic that we had, and we're going to put it into a server. And then it'll coordinate with the blockchain just in a few places. So let me get this straight. You're going to solve your problems of decentralization by centralizing the application. How are you any better than Uber? Okay, this is the reality that people are starting to discover. So you need to take a step back and say, what is the real model that you want to have for smart contracts? It's a model where you have to have a very clear understanding of what runs off-chain and what runs on-chain. With Cardano, Plutus, what we do with this is we say, you write Plutus code to write the stuff on-chain. That's succinct, that's small, that's predictable, and that's mostly about enhancing some facility of your application. But you're still going to have a server client at the end of the day because you need that for efficiency, and there's no sense in throwing away a $1 trillion ecosystem that's been around for over 20 years and is continuing to be the dominant standard. It's always going to be faster, cheaper, and better. But instead, what you're doing is augmenting it via services to make that app a little bit better, a little bit more trustless, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you're adding a payment system. Maybe you're adding random number generation, so you don't have to trust the house for your gambling, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have a different set of code that runs off-chain. And that code is either on the client side, it's on the server side. Now, the difference between us and Ethereum is first we have a very sensible model about how to embed these contracts. Instead of saying we're going to do a distributed system with a mutable state, and tear out our hair trying to figure out how to deal with this global mutable state that everybody can play with, we're going to do it with a mutable state, just like UTXO accounting, and then extend it. What does that mean? It means that we can take 10 years of lessons that Bitcoin has had and just make it better, and then we can use all this functional programming theory that's existed since the 1950s and reuse that to build much more sensible, easier to shard contracts for the on-chain stuff. Then we can embed that in a language, a real programming language like Haskell, which we can deploy to JavaScript or to WebAssembly, so it can work in the browser and it can work on mobile devices, it can work on node packages, et cetera, et cetera. So mainstream development tools that everyday developers, millions of developers are using right now somewhere in the world, we can do that there. And then you at least have a very practical model of how these things are going to work together. Now, there's plenty of opportunities to accelerate it, expand it. First, you got to get as much as you can off the chain. And so MPC is one route. That's what our Tokyo Tech Lab does. And so they say things like poker, first off, do you really want to run that on a blockchain? Does that make a lot of sense to you, to have a poker game? What do you care about? You care that you're going to get paid, and you care that it's a fair game, and that you can always find players, and that those players are randomly selected so that there's no like bias or something, right? Okay. So use the blockchain as a trusted bulletin board and a gossip network for people to find each other, and an exit and entry point to get into the game. But then the game itself, have the players run that through multi-party computation. So it's ephemeral, it's private, and you can throw away all the junk, and the players are providing all the resources to host it. That's not a new idea. I mean, analogously, you could look at games like League of Legends. You find each other through the matching servers, but then the players actually host and provide an enormous amount of the resources for that game environment. So Riot doesn't have to spend $1 billion a year on hosting costs. It's your network connection, it's your hard drive, it's your resources that's going into that. So things like that, verified computation and other things, can let this model gradually grow, and then you start using the blockchain for what it's supposed to be. It's an audit layer. It's something that tells you the computation has run correctly. But it's not necessarily the environment where you're actually doing the computation, because it's just too expensive to do that. Second, your question about VHS versus Betamax. Well, Bitcoin is the VHS, and what did VHS do? It built an ecosystem. We keep thinking, oh, well, it killed the other ecosystem, but regardless of Betamax 1 or VHS 1, it transformed the way we look at televisions. Televisions were one way. They broadcast to us. And then suddenly we had this device, we could plug into it, that we could do something with it. We could play a movie on it. And then suddenly people said, well, no, we built gaming consoles. And then Nintendo came out, and all these other things came out. And then what did it do? It created a distribution model, the video store, which also rented video games, et cetera, et cetera. So a whole ecosystem started building out of that, which was then leveraged for DVDs, and then leveraged for the entire console industry and so forth. Okay? So Bitcoin opens up an ecosystem for us, but it by no means drowns it all out. It's not like VHS suddenly dominated everything and killed the Nintendo, because they do different things. What Bitcoin does is it gives you a consumer concept of digital identity and keys and wallet management and restoration. But once you have those understandings, those concepts, that infrastructure, you can then reuse that for an Ethereum or for a Cardano. And going from Bitcoin to Ethereum is orders of magnitude easier for the consumer than going from nothing to Bitcoin. So in a way, that's the gateway drug. And no one has created a standard for computation. No one has created a standard for smart contracts at the moment. They're just not being used at scale. And so it's very early days. It's the infrastructure days. And we have the luxury to take a step back and be very meticulous about this, because when those standards do get set, they will be used for decades. And the sins that were made with TCP/IP, and the sins that were made with JavaScript, and the sins that were made with passwords and the e-commerce model, we all have had to face for over 40 years in the case of TCP/IP, and 2 decades in the case of Netscape's sins. And what does that actually mean? Mass loss of privacy, hundreds of millions of accounts being hacked, people basically just using the same password everywhere, and it's generally a weak password, so once it's broken one place, it's broken every place. And it's resulted in a fundamentally unsafe experience and a bad experience for consumers. I would much rather get it right, or at least get it better, than just rush to market and hope to God that you can somehow become the market standard and then own everything. Because here's the thing, this is not a web application. This is your money, your property, your identity. This is not just Facebook versus MySpace, whoever wins. This is the core of your digital life moving forward. And in some cases, with privacy-preserving systems, this is life and death. Can you imagine using private computation to run an underground newspaper in North Korea to talk about that regime? Or to be gay in Iran or some country that's not so good? If we get it wrong, guess what happens? You die, or you get thrown into a prison camp. And so what? We're just for the sake of trying to capture market share, willing to throw people under the bus and have people lose hundreds of millions of dollars? I mean, this is exactly what happened with the DAO. This is exactly what happened with the parity bug. In the case of the multi-sig parity bug, they had a goddamn intern write the smart contract. Hundreds of millions of dollars stored by a person that had almost never written this code before and had very limited computer science experience. And what are the consequences? What are the lawsuits? It's a moral hazard. So we have a moral obligation to first do things as correctly as we can, and with the tools and processes that we've fought for over the last 4 decades to learn how to use, from formal methods to peer review, to just better coding practices. And then frankly, we also have to know that whatever we end up creating is going to last a long time once it sets. And also we have to look at the technology and where we're at, and we say, the tech, no one's won. There is no standard, and nothing that's been brought to market scales, and nothing that's been brought to market at the moment is useful at the end of the day to anyone. And there are some people who cheat a little bit, like EOS. This is the worst offender in my view. What did they do? They took 21 nodes running on Amazon, they linked them together into a thing that's not even Byzantine tolerant, and then they just make up that they somehow have decentralized infrastructure when 90% of the currency is owned by 1% of the people. So at the end of the day, you have a plutocracy, and you've wired a bunch of Amazon servers together with a protocol that's not even Byzantine resistant, and suddenly you're innovative. It's a lie. And yes, they have some dabs. Well, you know, if I was to do apples to apples comparison, I would say they're actually at less than 0.01% because Amazon has more things deployed on it. I'm not going to compare them with Ethereum or anything else. They're not real infrastructure. So again, there's no market standard at the moment, and we have plenty of time to get to where we need to go. It's like 1980s internet, and we're going to have some regressions. I would like, though, for us to be smarter this time around. There was a great technology in 1991. Do you guys know what it was for the internet? It was called PGP. And PGP is more than just secure email. It was come by John Callis and Phil Zimmerman. Actually, Hal Finney worked on it as well. He also worked on Bitcoin. He was a friend of Satoshi's. He died of ALS. Wonderful guy, though. And anyway, PGP was all about saying, we're going to create a public-private key pair, and we can use this to encrypt email. Well, guess what? Had it been adopted, we would have also had a password-free internet. Because account creation would have just been, you have a challenge response protocol. They say, click here to register, you'd sign something, send it, and then you have your account. You'd never have a password. 1991, we could have had a password-free internet, one click, much more secure than anything with passwords, and we'd also have e-commerce from that. We'd have had total e-commerce capability pre-web certificate. Didn't take off. So sometimes you have to have some foresight here and say, God, if only we have the courage to invest a little bit into better ways of doing things, we can really, really make things great for consumers and make their lives better, protect them from fraud and security issues and other things like that. And that's basically what we're doing. Now, reasonable people can disagree. And that's why there's 3,000 cryptocurrencies. And that's why we have this fertile garden of many different things going on. If you think that move fast and break things way is the way to go, there are plenty of options for you. But the whole point of doing things differently and thinking differently is having the courage to go your own way. Steve Jobs did this in 2007 with the iPhone. He didn't try to chase 1 million developers and 1 million apps. He tried to get 50 to 100 good ones, which is why he went to John Doerr and gave him $100 million at Kleiner Perkins and said, find me 50 to 100 great apps to show why the iPhone is better than everything else. And other ecosystems tried to chase as many developers as possible. And the iPhone is still the premium product, and it built a great ecosystem. And the other one won too. Android's still good too, so there's great competition. Okay, next question. I get passionate about that one because I get it a lot.
Hello. Hi, Charles. Here. I'm John. First of all, thank you for what you do and everybody at the Mergo. Regarding ADA, which monetary properties, store of value, medium of exchange, do you see as a key property for ADA? And the second question is, somebody like Jim Rickards refers to cryptocurrencies problem as if they are limited in number, they are not deflationary, and therefore you cannot create any loans or bond market because if you pay it back, it becomes more expensive. So there's an inherent problem to this limitation. So would like to have your view on those two.
Yeah, these are great questions. And actually, I've been in space so damn long that I remember getting these questions on the first end, and now they're cycling back. 2011, the only thing we really can talk about is what is money. So you have 3 properties: means of exchange, unit of account, and a store of value. You have to kind of have all 3 for it to actually work well. You also need credit, I would argue, for a true monetary system to work properly. So if you have lots of volatility, it's impossible to have credit because no one actually knows who's going to come out ahead on a loan. Let's just use a thought experiment. So I give you Bitcoin December of 2013, 10 Bitcoin, and you have to pay me back December of 2014, and let's run it again now 2 years, December of 2015, and then 3 years, 2016. If you do any of these time slots, usually either up or down substantially. Like you go from $1,200 per Bitcoin to $250 all the way up. So that's not sustainable, and that's not a system that promotes credit. So it's kind of a proto-money, and that's why I don't refer to Bitcoin as money. I refer to it as a commodity, like gold. And from that perspective, it seems a pretty reasonable store of value. You put some money into it. It has a fixed cost. It has a cost to create it. People take it seriously. There's goods and services you can purchase with it. It has a lot of properties that are much better than gold. Like, people can confiscate my gold. I can just remember 12 keywords and run away, and restore my Bitcoin wallet. So that in itself makes it much better, and also it's divisible. It's hard to cut a gold bar if you've ever tried to do that. So that's the monetary policy of Bitcoin. Now, where it gets complicated is when you go to these hybrid systems like Cardano or Ethereum, where it has utility. So it goes beyond just we're a commodity and we have a store of value and that's that, to now suddenly these tokens mean something, like they're fuel for computation. And also, if this is the foundational layer for a world financial system, it's like owning shares in a world financial system and actually having the ability to have some control over the governance of that system and the maintenance of that system. So if it gets big enough, you could actually imagine central banks buying it to actually have control over it. So that in some way has some influence over the price and over the token, more so than any speculation would as a store of value. So Cardano is a multi-asset system. We have a multi-asset specification. When Plutus ships with it for smart contracts, we'll also ship the ability to issue tokens. So just like ERC20, we have our own version of that. We call it chimeric ledgers. Now, that means you can have multiple monetary policies concurrently. So you have this base token, it's kind of the conductor of the symphony, coordinates the whole thing, pays for the computation, and it also allows you to have a say in how the system works. That's ADA. Whatever that monetary policy is, it is what it is. Then you have the ability to issue your own tokens that have different policies, like stable coins, algorithmic or asset-backed, and eventually you could see some variant of Tether, USDT or something, or gold-backed currency or something like that issued on our system. Now, that would be a lot better for credit. That would be a lot better for high velocity and for actual commerce and so forth, and probably will end up having more transaction volume than the base asset itself. There's probably more turnaround at Tether and trading of Tether than there are Bitcoin transactions at this point, all things considered, because it's just more useful in that respect when you're talking about an actual currency. The point is that both can live in the same system, and one provides security, safety, and reliability to the other, so that the people who build the asset that focus on stability are not also have to be master cryptographers. They don't have to think in distributed systems theory and figure out how do we build the ultimate cryptocurrency and incentivize the maintenance of that. They're effectively renting space in a system that gives all of them that for free. And the stronger that system becomes, the better their system becomes, and the more accessible that system becomes. And that's effectively where we're at as a space. So I think the problem that these economists have is, first, they understand history, and they looked at the deflationary spirals of the 1880s and 1890s when we were dealing with gold-backed money, and it was really problematic for people, especially farmers, where it was deflationary as the value of the money was going up, but not universal throughout the whole economy. So basically, people were having to buy things that were really, really valuable, but their wages weren't matching that. So they were getting poorer and poorer systematically. So people tend to look at deflation from a historical lens as something that's dangerous for society. But that's not the full story. These are much more complicated economies, especially when you have deflationary money when there's other monetary standards. Then suddenly consumer behavior changes a little bit. And you can see this actually in Argentina and other economies that their money's not so good. People actually use dollars to store value, then they convert the dollars into pesos to conduct commerce. The government tries to stop this, but no matter where you go in Buenos Aires, you can always exchange your money to dollars. It's just like there's a guy somewhere. 3:30 in the morning, you're just like walking down the street, some guy's going to come out of the alleyway, and you're, oh God, he's here to bug me. And he's like, hey, would you like to buy some dollars, or would you like to trade some pesos? Whoa. Okay. And so why? Because it's a dual currency economy. And the same in Ukraine and the same in many other places. The Ukrainians hold euros. They're not allowed to do it, but they still do it. See, so I think there's more to the story, and the economists don't have a sophisticated enough understanding of how these systems really work and what these systems really do, and the consequences of these systems. So they just tend to write them off wholesale and give them an unfair shake. It's not universally true. I've seen, especially in discussions in England, I was at the London School of Economics, and I had a discussion with a few people there, and there's a few monetary economists I've had discussions with where once I say, well, it's kind of a commodity, and I give the explanation I gave to you, they say, oh yeah, I can kind of see that, and then actually it does make sense and we can model these things. But there are still a lot of open-ended questions. Like, for example, can we create an algorithmic stablecoin, or will we always need to have a backing? Because the problem with backing is it means you never decentralize. right? Because somebody has to hold the gold or the dollars, and then you have an existential risk to the system. You know, private banks used to issue money in the United States. We had 200-300 currencies floating around in the 19th century. Almost all of them failed within the first 10 years. So that's really dangerous for us, and I don't like that. But then if you look at algorithmic coins, it's like, well, how do you actually build that? You know, there's a lot of mechanics there. So we need to engage with the economists intelligently to do these types of things, and there are some great projects like Saga and others that are trying to accomplish this. MakerDAO is trying to accomplish this and so forth. And the jury remains to be seen whether they accomplish it or not. But that's another hard problem. But you know, right now this is trying to solve some more foundational problems, and I hope people build tokens on our system that solve those hard problems. That's a great portfolio company for investors. Good questions today. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm slowly trying to, or getting to understand a little bit better what this is all about. Going back to what you're trying to do in Africa, give people access to a financial system, bank, etc. One of the problems for crypto to go mainstream is, you have to handle these private keys and recovery phrases, etc. Whereas with a normal bank, you forgot your password, and okay, click, forgot my password, then you get, a reset. So I'm just asking myself, how is this going to work in Africa? And the second part of that is that I seem to understand that, decentralization and centralization are not exactly at war here, because dApps seems to be like, in many cases, a misnomer. It's not decentralized, it's actually let's say, sometimes the centralized part which is running on a decentralized blockchain like Cardano. So could you maybe comment a bit more on that?
Okay, well, this is where I get to use props. This is fun. Josh!
Yeah.
Ah, there you go. Hey, buddy, give me one of those tangem cards. So, this is pretty cool. Here, I only need one. So this piece of plastic, what is this? Yeah. Costs less than $1 to make. It's got a trusted hardware module on it. I'm like, go ahead and give me your phone. Let's see how this works. So these are going to be all pretty by the time the conference comes. Okay, I hold it on the back of his phone. Oh, and look, I just opened up an ADA wallet. Huzzah! Okay, so what is this all about? What's the point? Okay. Private key management's super duper hard, and you bring a very valid problem that first you have to take people who are not used to this and somehow give them something that makes it easy. Second, you have to start thinking around management of that ecosystem, like what happens when they die? How do they get, next of kin get the money? Or what if they lose the key? How do we recover from these events? Okay, that's all reasonable. The first stage, and also the internet. You can't go to a place with intermittent internet and say it needs to be online all the time, and that's the only way it works. It's like fucking crazy if you propose that. So this is the first step in a series of steps that need to be taken that eventually allow us to have kind of a replication of cash. So take something people get. Like, I say it's $22 and you hand me a 20 and a 10, and then I hand you back $8, right? Cash register accounting, you get this, you get how cash works. I hand you some paper, you hand me some things back, it's there. So this is super cheap to make, super cheap to distribute, and will over time get more and more capable and eventually allow us to do offline, off-chain transactions. So you don't have to be online. You can use the trusted hardware to move value from one enclave to another enclave just by tapping cards or doing something like that. And that in itself is really powerful. And then you say, it's kind of like cash then. I give you 30, you give me back some change. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Okay, that's step one. Then the other thing is, it can't just be about money. You have to think around lifestyle. You have to think of what's going on. So let's give us the Ethiopian pilot that we're doing as an example. So our goal eventually is to take all the 1.5 million coffee farmers in Ethiopia who right now are living in a very low-tech environment. When they want to sell their beans, they text message a bunch of washing stations, they find who has the best price, put the beans on the back of the donkey, ride it to the washing station, go sell it. That's their world. Well, here's the deal. The way they grow food, the way they sell food, it's going to change. Not because they want it to change, but because the international community is forcing them to do that. We have all these mandates, carbon reduction, fair trade, equity, all this stuff that's coming down the pipe, and they're saying, if you don't got it, we're not going to buy your product. So out of necessity, they have to digitize. They have to change the way they're doing things. Okay, so you have money and international pressure and national pressure to upgrade. Now, tracking and traceability, the first thing you need to do is figure out who's doing what where. You've got to model that chain. That means everybody needs an identity. It's a given. Does it matter if that identity is compatible with cryptocurrencies or not? No. So let's make it compatible because it's a nice to have thing. And things like this can not only just be a wallet, they can not only just be cash, they can be a facilitator for digital identities. You see, so that's kind of how we think, is we say, let's inject ourselves into discussions about digital identity and supply chain management in places where there's already money and pre-existing desire to deploy infrastructure. And then let's go just deploy the whole thing, and then suddenly we have 1.5 million people that have wallets, suddenly we have 1.5 million people that are doing transactions. I can just as well use this to trade tokens that track beans as I can a digital currency. So you can imagine the future that when somebody's going to sell their coffee, they check it in at the washing station, they also tap their card on some device. Do they really have to understand how public key crypto works and all this complexity works? No, they're just tapping a card. Just like when you ride the subway, you have your little card, you tap it and it opens up the gate. Do you really have to know how that works? No. But now, all of a sudden, we have just created a check-in system that also has an identity system, that also track and trace, and it's also an address that I can use for credit and insurance and a whole bunch of other things. So that I can connect that blockchain system, which is a permissioned enterprise blockchain that we're building, Cardano Enterprise, that's the permission side of the ecosystem, and I can connect that to an open ledger. Then you guys can now all of a sudden interface with those 1.5 million customers for the first time in their lives. They've been digitized, globalized, and banked, not even knowing it. Give them loans, give them insurance, give them a whole new remittance system. Sky's the limit. It's cross-border, permissionless, do whatever the hell they want to do, and they already have the infrastructure for it. And this is so cheap, there's no incentive to sell it. That's another problem. You don't give someone really poor a $500 thing. They're not going to use it, they're going to sell it. You give them a 50-cent thing that's fungible. It's easy to use, easy to remember. And also for refugee relief. What happens if the monsoons come or the forest burns down or some war breaks out and you have a diaspora? Now I can suddenly send human aid right to these accounts. I don't even know where they're at, but I can pay them. And they can survive. That's the magic of systems like this and investments in technology like this and where we're going to go. And basically the monetary model is a PPP. It's a public-private partnership. So you go and you train a bunch of people, you get a cohort. You did that in Ethiopia. We have 23 people, 19 Ethiopians before you got it. Next step, you sign a pilot, you go do something, you prove that you can actually do it. Get some credibility. And then, if it works, set up a company, a public-private company. Give some of the equity to the government, give some to Wall Street through securitization. You give some to, we own some of it, and some of the local partners. And then that thing runs the whole vertical, all those 1.5 million coffee farmers. The government doesn't have to pay anything to get it installed, and you monetize it through transactions on the back end. And then you brought everybody into the cryptocurrency space, and they don't even know it. That's how we're going to get adoption for 3 billion people. Because all these people in the next 20 years are going to be upgraded, whether they like it or not. And we're going to be part of that conversation where and when it happens. And when they get upgraded, I'm sure as hell not going to integrate ethereum. Integrate this. Josh, what's your tangent?